The kitchen at Iron Ridge Ranch smelled like burning sage and old fear. Clara Whitmore stood over the cast iron stove at 4:30 in the morning, same as every morning for the past 6 years, watching bacon grease pop and sizzle while her left eye throbbed beneath makeup she'd applied in darkness. The bruise underneath was 3 days old, purple turning yellow at the edges. And if she kept her face angled just right, nobody would ask questions nobody wanted answered. Outside, winter pressed against the windows like something living. Montana Territory in January didn't mess around. The kind of cold that killed cattle and froze men solid in their saddles. The kind of cold that made everything harder, including hiding. She flipped the bacon with the hands that had stopped shaking years ago. You got used to things, that's what she told herself. You got used to walking quiet, to laughing at the right jokes, to making yourself small enough that anger slid past you like wind through a canyon. The kitchen door banged open. "Where's my breakfast?" Earl Whitmore stumbled in, smelling like the previous night's whiskey and this morning's meanness. 42 years old and aging like spoiled meat, red-faced, thick-necked, with eyes that held the kind of cruelty that didn't need a reason. "Almost ready," Clara said, keeping her voice flat. Neutral. The tone that didn't provoke. "Almost ain't on the table." She plated his food, 6 eggs, 8 strips of bacon, biscuits she'd made from scratch, and set it down without meeting his eyes. Safe. Invisible. Earl grabbed her wrist. "You gonna look at me when I'm talking to you?" His fingers dug into the exact spot he'd grabbed her 2 nights ago, purple on purple. She inhaled slowly through her nose. "Yes, Earl." "Yes, Earl, what?" "Yes, Earl, I'm sorry." He held her there for 3 more seconds, long enough to make his point, then released her and started eating like she'd already disappeared. Clara turned back to the stove and counted to 20, same ritual she'd performed 1,000 times. When she hit 20, she was allowed to feel again. Anger, humiliation, the savage fantasy of dumping boiling grease over his head and walking out into the snow. 20. She exhaled. The Cowboys would arrive in 15 minutes, expecting breakfast for 30. Work swallowed everything if you let it. That was the other thing you got used to. By 6 a.m., the kitchen was chaos in the best way. Ranch hands crowded around the long tables, eating like wolves, arguing about horses and cards, and whether Tommy Bledsoe had actually seen a mountain lion or just a really angry barn cat. Clara moved between them with coffee and fresh biscuits, and for an hour every morning she almost felt normal, useful, like she was feeding family instead of hiding from one. "Clara, you're a saint," old Pete Donovan said, mouth full of eggs. "My mama couldn't cook bacon this good if her life depended on it." "Your mama's been dead 12 years, Pete," someone called out. "Which proves my point." Laughter rippled through the kitchen. Clara smiled, the small, careful smile she'd perfected. Pleasant, but not too friendly. You couldn't be too friendly. People got ideas. She was refilling Hank Morrison's coffee when she felt it. Someone watching. Not the casual glances she was used to, the quick assessments men made of any woman in their vicinity, but the kind of attention that made the back of your neck prickle. Clara looked up. Rowan Cade stood in the doorway. 6'4" of weathered rancher, 47 years old, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes the color of creek water after rain. He'd built Iron Ridge Ranch from nothing, 4,000 acres of the best grazing land in the territory, 200 head of cattle, and a reputation that made cattle thieves think twice before crossing into his valley. Men respected Rowan Cade. Women wanted him. He'd been widowed 8 years and showed no interest in changing that status. Right now, those creek water eyes were locked on Clara's wrist. She'd rolled up her sleeves for kitchen work. The bruises showed. 4 distinct finger marks wrapped around her forearm like a bracelet of decay. Clara froze. Rowan's expression didn't change. He was too controlled for that. But something shifted in the air between them. Recognition. The kind that couldn't be unknown. She yanked her sleeve down. He looked away, but the damage was done. Muck. Earl cornered her that afternoon in the storage shed. "You been talking to people?" Clara was counting potato sacks, 37 left. They'd need more before the spring. She didn't look up. "No." "Don't lie to me." His breath hit her face, sour with tobacco. "I saw how Cade looked at you this morning. You say something to him?" I didn't say anything to anybody, Earl. I never do. Then why's he staring at you like you're some kicked puppy? Because I am, she thought. Because that's exactly what I am. I don't know what you're talking about. Earl grabbed her face, fingers pressing into her cheeks hard enough to bruise. You make me look bad in front of these men. I'll give you something real to cry about. Understand? Clara's heart hammered. Stay small, stay quiet. I understand. He shoved her back into the potato sacks and left. She sat there for 10 minutes, breathing carefully, waiting for the shaking to stop. It always stopped eventually. Then you got up, made dinner, survived another day. Surviving was the job. She'd been doing it for 13 years. That's it. 3 days later, Rowan Cade called Earl into his office. Clara didn't hear the conversation. Nobody did. But every ranch hand within 50 yards heard the result. Earl came out of that office looking like he'd been slapped, white-faced, jaw clenched. He walked straight past Clara without a word. That night he came home gentle, apologetic, made her coffee the way she liked it and sat at the kitchen table in their small cabin looking like a man who'd seen his own grave. I'm going to do better, he said quietly. I mean it this time, Clara. I'm going to be the man you deserved. She'd heard this speech before, 17 times in 13 years, if she was counting, and Clara was always counting. Okay, Earl. I know I got a temper. I know I ain't easy, but I love you. You know that, right? The lies came automatic. I know. Cade warned me, said if I laid hands on you again, I'm done at Iron Ridge. Finished. So that was it. Not guilt, not love. Fear of losing his job. Clara felt something crack inside her chest, some small, stupid piece that had still believed in redemption. You should get some sleep, she said. Earl nodded and went to bed like an obedient child. Clara sat at the kitchen table until midnight, staring at her coffee, thinking about the man in the office who'd noticed her wrists and decided to do something about it. Nobody had ever done something about it before. Quote, the peace lasted 11 days. On the 12th day, Earl came home drunk and found Clara reading a book one of the ranch wives had lent her. Some romance novel about a woman in Boston who fell in love with a ship captain. What's this? Earl snatched the book from her hands. Just something Mrs. Patterson gave me. You think you're better than me, reading fancy books while I'm working? No, Earl, He ripped the book in half. Clara watched the pages scatter across the floor and felt something inside her go very still. Very quiet. Not sad. Not scared. Angry. Pure, clean, 13 years overdue anger. That wasn't yours, she said. Earl blinked. What? I said that wasn't yours to destroy. Don't you talk back to me. I have to return that book, Earl. Mrs. Patterson lent it to me, and now His fist caught her in the stomach. Clara went down hard, gasping, the world tilting sideways. She'd been hit before. Slapped, shoved. But he'd never punched her like that. Like she was a man in a bar fight instead of his wife. Earl stood over her, breathing hard. Look what you made me do. She couldn't answer, couldn't breathe. I said, look what you made me do. Through the pain and the panic, Clara heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy, deliberate. The cabin door exploded inward. Rowan Cade filled the doorway like an act of judgment. He took in the scene, Clara on the floor, Earl standing over her with his fist still clenched, and something terrible crossed his face. Get away from her. Earl stumbled backward. This ain't your business, Cade. I'm making it my business. Rowan crossed the room in 3 strides, putting himself between Clara and her husband. You've got 10 seconds to get out of this cabin before I forget you're human. She's my wife. She's a person, and you just lost the right to be near her. Clara managed to sit up, still gasping for air. The world felt unreal. This didn't happen. Men didn't interfere. This was how frontier marriages worked, ugly and private and brutal. Earl's face twisted. You can't do this. Already done. You're fired. Off Iron Ridge by morning. You're taking her side? Earl's voice cracked. Over me? I've been working this ranch for 6 years. And you've been beating your wife for longer. Get out. For a moment, Clara thought Earl might swing at Rowan. Thought she might watch her husband get killed right there in their tiny cabin. But Earl wasn't that drunk or that stupid. He grabbed his coat and slammed out into the night, cursing them both to various hells. Silence rushed in. Rowan knelt beside Clara, his face carefully neutral. "Can you stand?" "I think so." He helped her up, gentle, like she was made of glass that might shatter, and guided her to the chair. "I'll send Doc Morrison over." "I'm fine." "Clara." "Please don't." She couldn't look at him, couldn't process what had just happened. "I'm fine. I just need to clean up." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, then, "He's not coming back. I mean it. You're under Iron Ridge protection now, same as any of my men. Nobody touches you. People will talk. Let them. You'll lose business. The town council, the church, they'll—" "I don't care." Clara finally looked up at him. "Why?" It was the most dangerous question she'd ever asked. Rowan met her eyes. "Because I got 2 rules on my ranch. Work hard and don't hurt people weaker than you. Earl broke the second one. That's all there is to it." He stood, adjusted his hat, and headed for the door. "Mr. Cade." He paused. "Thank you." He nodded once and disappeared into the Montana night, leaving Clara alone with the broken book, the broken furniture, and the first fragile thread of something she'd thought was extinct in her life. Hope. Morning came too fast and too bright. Clara woke in the cabin alone. Earl hadn't returned. And for a moment she let herself imagine this was her life. Silence. Safety. Space to breathe without calculating angles and moods and how loud the floorboards creaked. Then reality crashed back. Earl was gone, but not gone. Fired, but not far. And she was a married woman living on a bachelor rancher's property without her husband. The scandal would be nuclear. She dragged herself to the main house kitchen, expecting whispers and sidelong glances. What she got was worse. Sympathy. "Oh, honey," said Margaret Hayes, the head housekeeper, pulling Clara into a fierce hug. "We all heard. I'm so sorry. You should have said something years ago." "I didn't. I couldn't." I know, sweetheart." Margaret pulled back, eyes shining. "But you're safe now. Mr. Cade made that real clear to everyone this morning. Anyone gives you trouble answers to him." Pete Donovan clapped her gently on the shoulder as he passed. "About damn time someone stood up to that bastard. Pardon my language." One by one, the ranch hands made it known. They were on her side. Clara felt something inside her chest expand, some organ she didn't have a name for, the opposite of loneliness. Then Rowan walked in. The kitchen went quiet. He looked at Clara. "You have a minute?" Her stomach dropped. "Yes, sir." They walked to his office, a sparse room lined with ledgers and maps, and Rowan shut the door. "You can stay as long as you need," he said without preamble. "Cabin's yours. Meals are covered. I'll pay you wages for kitchen work if you want to keep doing that, but you don't have to. You're not a prisoner here." Clara's throat tightened. "Earl's going to come back." "Not if he's smart." "He's not smart. He's mean. Then we'll handle it." Rowan leaned against his desk. "Clara, I'm not trying to control your life. You want to leave tomorrow and never look back. That's your choice. You want to reconcile with Earl? No." The word came out harder than she'd intended. Rowan studied her. "No? No. I'm done. She took a shaky breath. "I don't know what I am, but I'm done being afraid in my own house." Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe? Or recognition. "All right then," he said quietly. "Then you're under Iron Ridge protection. That means something in this valley." It meant everything. It meant war. Shots. The town of Blackstone Valley had opinions. By week's end, the scandal had reached volcanic proportions. A married woman. A bachelor rancher. No chaperone. No propriety. Reverend Thomas denounced them from the pulpit. Merchants refused to do business with Iron Ridge. The mayor himself showed up, demanding Clara be sent back to her husband immediately. Rowan told him to get off his property. Clara watched the fallout from the kitchen windows and felt sick with guilt. "You should send me away," she told Rowan one evening. "I'm destroying everything you've built." "You're not destroying anything. They're showing who they always were. But your business will survive. It always does." He poured them both coffee. "You want to know what I learned building this ranch? People respect strength. Right now they're testing to see if I'll fold. I won't." Why? There was that question again, that dangerous, necessary question. Rowan was quiet for a long time. Then, my wife died in childbirth 8 years ago. I wasn't here. I was in Cheyenne buying cattle. By the time I got back, she'd been gone for 2 days. Clara's breath caught. I spent years being angry. Angry at her for dying. Angry at myself for not being there. Angry at every woman in town who survived when she didn't. He stared into his coffee. Then I saw your wrists, saw how you made yourself small, and I realized I'd been watching you disappear for 6 years and never said a word. You didn't know, and I knew. Everyone knew. We just didn't care enough to make it our problem. He looked up. I'm making it my problem now. The thing in Clara's chest, that unnamed organ, cracked wide open. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. He wasn't wrong. Earl returned 2 weeks later with the corrupt mayor, a sympathetic judge, and half the town council. They showed up at Iron Ridge demanding Clara be released to her lawful husband. Rowan met them on the porch with a rifle. She's not your property, Earl. The law says different. Earl looked past him toward the house. Clara, get out here! She appeared in the doorway, pale but steady. For the first time in 13 years, Clara looked at her husband without flinching. I'm not coming back. The town councilmen exchanged looks. Mrs. Whitmore, the judge said carefully, we understand you've had difficulties, but marriage is a sacred bond. Surely you and your husband can... He beat me. For 13 years, he beat me. Silence. Now hold on, Earl started, but Clara cut him off. You want to pretend we don't all know the truth? Fine. Let's stop pretending. She looked at each man on that porch. Every one of you has seen my bruises. At church socials, at town gatherings. You saw, and you did nothing. The mayor shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Whitmore, marital disputes are... This wasn't a dispute. This was violence, and I'm done. Earl's face went purple. You can't just leave. Watch me. He lunged for her. Rowan's rifle came up so fast Earl froze mid-step. Touch her and find out what happens, Rowan said quietly. For a moment, the world balanced on a knife edge. Then the judge cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss this in a more official capacity. A hearing, perhaps, to determine the legitimacy of Mrs. Whitmore's claims. Clara's stomach dropped. A trial. But Rowan just nodded. Fine, set it up. We'll be there. The men departed, Earl shooting Clara a look of pure hatred. When they were gone, she finally let herself shake. They're going to force me back to him. No, Rowan said, they're not. You can't know that. He turned to face her fully. Clara, I've faced down cattle rustlers, drought, and men who'd kill me for this land. You think I'm scared of some corrupt judge? This is different. This is the law. Then we'll change the law. He said it like it was that simple, like she was worth burning the whole world down for. Clara realized something terrifying. She was falling in love with him, and everyone in Blackstone Valley could see it. The weeks before the trial were strange. Clara stayed at Iron Ridge, working the kitchen, managing supplies, slowly becoming part of the ranch's rhythm. The cowboys treated her with careful respect. Margaret mothered her relentlessly. And Rowan was everywhere and nowhere. He kept his distance, too aware of the gossip, but Clara felt his attention like sunlight. The way he looked up when she entered a room. The way he listened when she talked about anything, even mundane things like flower orders and weather patterns. The way he looked at her like she was a person worth knowing. One evening, she found him on the porch watching storm clouds gather over the mountains. Can I sit? It's your porch, too. She settled into the chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to distant thunder. I've been thinking, Clara said carefully, about after the trial. After you win, you mean? If I win, what do I do then? Rowan glanced at her. Whatever you want. I've never done that before. Whatever I want. Then it's about time you started. More silence. The storm was getting closer. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Why haven't you remarried? In 8 years you must have had offers. Rowan's jaw tightened. I wasn't ready. And now? He looked at her then. really looked at her, and Clara saw everything he wasn't saying. "Now," he said slowly, "I'm starting to think I might be." The air between them charged like the gathering storm. Clara knew she should pull back, should protect them both from more scandal. Instead, she reached over and took his hand. He didn't pull away. They sat there holding hands while the storm rolled in. Two people who'd survived their own private hells, finding something like peace in the wreckage. And tomorrow, they'd fight for the right to keep it. But tonight, this was enough. Nkakit. End part 1. The storm that night turned the ranch roads to mud and the valley into a gray smear of rain. Clara stood at the kitchen window the next morning watching water pour off the roof in sheets, thinking about how weather didn't care about human problems. Storms came whether you were ready or not. She wasn't ready. The trial was set for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks for Earl to plan his revenge. 3 weeks for the entire territory to pick sides in a fight that should have been simple but never was when it came to women and the law. You planning to burn a hole through that window? Clara turned to find Margaret setting down a basket of eggs. The older woman had been up since dawn, same as always, keeping the ranch running through sheer force of will and excellent organizational skills. Just thinking. Thinking's good, panicking's not. Which one are you doing? Both, probably. Margaret snorted. Honest answer. I like that. She started cracking eggs into a bowl with practiced efficiency. You know what your problem is? Just one. You're still treating this like you're the one who did something wrong. You didn't. Earl did. The town did. Every person who saw those bruises and looked away did. Clara picked up a knife and started chopping onions. The sting in her eyes gave her an excuse for the wetness gathering there. Doesn't change how people see it. Then people are idiots. Present company excluded, of course. Of course. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, falling into the rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks. Margaret had become something Clara had never really had before. A friend. No judgment. No pity. Just steady presence and the occasional sharp observation that cut through nonsense like a hot knife. "Rowan's bringing someone in from Cheyenne," Margaret said casually. "Lawyer. Woman, apparently." Clara's hands stilled. "A woman lawyer?" Shocked me too. Didn't know such a thing existed outside of storybooks. But Rowan says she's good, handles divorce cases, specializes in situations like yours. There are situations like mine? Margaret gave her a long look. "Honey, you think you're the first woman to get trapped in a bad marriage? You're just the first one around here brave enough to fight back publicly." The kitchen door banged open and 3 ranch hands stumbled in, shaking off rain and arguing about whether the creek would flood. $5 says it breaks the banks by Thursday, Tommy Bledsoe announced. "You're on," Hank Morrison replied. "That creek's held for worse storms than this." "Morning, Clara," Pete Donovan tipped his hat. "Smells like heaven in here as usual." She smiled despite herself. These men had made it clear where they stood. When Earl had shown up with the mayor, half the ranch hands had appeared on the porch with rifles. Not because Rowan ordered it, because they wanted to. It meant something. Maybe everything. Breakfast became the usual controlled chaos. 30 hungry men, mountains of food, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Clara moved through it all, pouring and serving and listening to their chatter about cattle and weather and the upcoming trial that nobody mentioned directly but everyone was thinking about. Rowan came in last, soaked to the bone. "Creek's rising," he announced. "Tommy, you win. It'll flood by tomorrow if this keeps up." Tommy whooped. Hank cursed and pulled out his wallet. Rowan grabbed coffee and stood near Clara, not quite beside her, but close enough that she felt the warmth of him. Close enough that everyone noticed. They always noticed. "Lawyer arrives this afternoon," he said quietly. "Her name's Elizabeth Chambers. She'll want to talk to you." Clara's stomach clenched. "What do I tell her?" "The truth? All of it. Even the parts I've never told anyone?" He looked at her then, those creek water eyes serious. "Especially those parts." The kitchen felt too small suddenly, too warm. Clara set down the coffee pot before her shaking hands could betray her. "I don't know if I can." "You can. You already did the hard part." "What hard part?" "You stayed alive." He said it matter of fact, like surviving 13 years of violence was an accomplishment worth noting, like she was strong instead of just stubborn. Clara wanted to believe him. She was trying to believe him. But 13 years of being told she was worthless didn't disappear in 3 weeks, no matter how kind the rancher or how supportive the cowboys. Margaret appeared at her elbow. "Go get some air. I'll handle breakfast cleanup." "I'm fine. I wasn't asking." Clara knew better than to argue with Margaret in full mother hen mode. She grabbed a shawl and slipped out the back door into the rain. The cold shocked her system, washing away the kitchen heat and the weight of too many eyes. She stood under the porch overhang and watched water turn the ranch yard into a temporary lake, thinking about floods and overflow and how sometimes you couldn't hold things back no matter how strong the banks. "You hiding or thinking?" She jumped. Rowan had followed her out, standing in the rain like he didn't notice he was getting soaked. "Both. That's the second time someone said that this morning. Maybe it's an epidemic." He smiled, that rare, quick thing that transformed his whole face. "Maybe." They stood there not quite looking at each other, the rain drumming a rhythm that filled the silence between words. "I'm scared," Clara admitted, "of the trial, of losing, of what Earl will do if I win." "I know. You can't protect me from everything. I can try. That's what I'm afraid of." She finally looked at him. "You're risking everything for me. Your reputation, your business, the respect of this whole valley. What if I'm not worth it?" Rowan stepped closer, rain dripping off his hat brim. "You are. You don't know that. I know you survived 13 years with a man who wanted to break you and you're still standing. I know you cook breakfast for 30 men every morning without complaining. I know you're kind to the ranch hands and sharp with inventory, and you're learning to read cattle better than cowboys twice your age." He paused. "I know you're scared, and you're here anyway. That's worth everything." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it. Just stop thinking you're not worth fighting for." Before she could answer, hoofbeats sounded from the road. A rider appeared through the rain, bent low against the weather, pushing hard toward the ranch house. Rowan's posture shifted. "That's Jacob from town. He doesn't ride like that unless something's wrong." They met the rider at the front porch. Jacob, a kid barely 20 who ran messages between the ranch and town, slid off his horse looking panicked. "Mr. Cade, you got to hear this. Earl's been talking. Says he's going to take Clara back by force if the law won't help him. Says he's got rights." Clara's blood went cold. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "He say when?" "Soon. Maybe tonight. He's been drinking at the saloon working himself up. Got some men agreeing with him too, saying a wife belongs to her husband, law or no law. How many men? 4, maybe 5 ranch hands from the Bartlett spread mostly." Rowan nodded slowly. "Go inside. Get warm. Margaret will feed you." Jacob hesitated. "Mr. Cade, Earl's drunk enough to do something stupid. I'm counting on it." Rowan looked at Clara. "Get inside. Stay there." "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done 6 years ago." He strode toward the bunkhouse, shouting for the ranch hands. Within minutes, men were appearing with rifles, checking ammunition, their faces set with the kind of grim determination that meant trouble. Margaret grabbed Clara's arm. "Inside, now! They're going to fight, yes, and you being out here won't help." She pulled Clara toward the house. "Men are idiots, but they're our idiots. Let them handle this." Clara let herself be led inside, but everything in her rebelled against hiding. She'd spent 13 years hiding, staying small, letting other people fight her battles because she was too scared to fight them herself. She was done being scared. Well, not done exactly. Still terrified, but willing to be terrified while doing something instead of nothing. "I need to talk to this lawyer when she arrives," Clara said. Margaret studied her. "You planning something?" "I'm planning to stop letting other people decide my life." "About damn time." Elizabeth Chambers arrived 3 hours later in a mud-splattered carriage, looking like she'd fought the weather personally and won. She was 40-something, sharp-faced, with eyes that missed nothing and a handshake that could crack walnuts. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've heard a lot about you. Most of it bad, I'd guess. Most of it interesting. There's a difference." Elizabeth shed her wet coat and got straight to business. "I need to hear your story, all of it, every detail you can remember. and I need you to understand something first. What? This trial isn't really about you and Earl. It's about whether a woman in Montana Territory has the right to leave a violent marriage. Win or lose, we're setting precedent here. You ready for that? Clara thought about Earl drunk and planning violence, about the town council condemning her, about Rowan willing to burn everything down to keep her safe. No, she said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. Elizabeth smiled. Good. Honest answers are what I need. Let's get started. They talked for 4 hours. Clara told her everything. The first time Earl hit her, 6 months into their marriage, backhanded across the face for burning dinner. The times he'd locked her in the cellar overnight, the broken ribs, the black eyes, the constant grinding fear that had become her baseline existence. Elizabeth took notes without flinching, asking questions that cut straight to bone. Did you ever fight back? Once, early on. He broke my wrist. Did you tell anyone? I told the doctor it was an accident. He knew. Everyone knew. Nobody cared. Did Earl ever threaten to kill you? Clara's hands twisted in her lap. Yes, multiple times. Did you believe him? Yes. Elizabeth set down her pen. Here's what's going to happen in that courtroom. Earl's lawyer will try to make you look like a liar, a seductress, a woman who abandoned her sacred duties. He'll imply you're having an affair with Rowan Cade. He'll suggest you're hysterical, emotional, unreliable. I know. Can you sit there and take that without breaking? Clara met her eyes. I've survived 13 years with Earl. I can survive a lawyer. That's what I needed to hear. Elizabeth leaned forward. We're going to win this, Clara, not because the law is on our side. It's not. But because you're willing to stand up there and tell the truth, and truth has a power these men underestimate. What if it's not enough? Then we appeal. We fight. We don't stop fighting until you're free. The certainty in her voice made Clara want to weep with relief. Before she could respond, gunshots cracked outside. Both women froze. Margaret appeared in the doorway, face pale. Earl's here, brought his men. Rowan's crew is holding them at the gate, but it's getting ugly. Elizabeth stood smoothly. Stay inside, both of you. Like hell, Clara said. She was out the door before either woman could stop her. The scene at the ranch gate looked like something from a war. Rowan and 15 armed ranch hands on one side. Earl and 5 drunk cowboys on the other. Rain pouring down on all of them like the sky was trying to wash away the stupidity. Earl saw her, and his face twisted with rage. There she is, my wife. Former wife, Rowan corrected. Or did you miss the part where you got served divorce papers? Those papers don't mean nothing until a judge says so. Clara, get over here, now. Clara walked forward, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Rowan shifted like he might physically stop her, but she shook her head slightly. This was her fight now. She stopped 10 feet from Earl, close enough to see the hatred in his bloodshot eyes. I'm not coming with you. You don't get a choice. I'm making one anyway. Earl laughed, ugly and sharp. You think Cade's going to protect you forever? You think he actually cares about you? He just wants what every man wants, and when he's done, you'll have nothing. No husband, no home, no reputation. I already have nothing with you. At least this nothing doesn't come with bruises. His hand went to his belt. Clara didn't flinch. You hit me here, in front of all these witnesses, and you prove everything I've said about you. So go ahead, Earl. Show them who you really are. For a moment she thought he'd do it, thought his rage would overcome whatever self-preservation he had left. Then Rowan cocked his rifle. The sound cut through the rain like a whip crack. Your choice, Earl. Turn around and ride out, or find out what happens when you threaten what's mine. She's not yours. She's not yours either. Not anymore. Earl's face went purple. This ain't over. Yeah, it is. You just don't know it yet. One of Earl's companions, a scarred ranch hand from the Bartlett spread, leaned over and muttered something. Earl jerked his horse's reins so hard the animal reared. See you in court, he snarled at Clara. We'll see who the judge believes, a faithful husband or a lying woman too stupid to know her place. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. The tension drained from the yard like water from a broken dam. Clara's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the mud, rain soaking through her dress, unable to stop shaking. Not from fear, from something else. Something that felt almost like power. Rowan was beside her in seconds. You all right? I didn't flinch. No, you didn't. He could have hit me, could have shot me. I didn't flinch. I noticed. She looked up at him, rain streaming down her face. I think I'm done being afraid of him. Rowan helped her stand. Good. Because we've got a trial to win. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Elizabeth drilled Clara on testimony, teaching her how to answer questions without apologizing for her own existence, how to stand straight when facing her abuser, how to speak truth without letting shame creep into her voice. They'll try to make you small, Elizabeth said. They'll use words like hysterical and emotional. Don't shrink, don't apologize, just tell what happened. Clara practiced until her voice stopped shaking, until she could say, he beat me, without flinching. Meanwhile, the town divided itself along fault lines that had always been there, but never visible. Women who'd never spoken to Clara before started showing up at Iron Ridge, bringing food and quiet support. Men who'd worked alongside Earl for years suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. The church held a special service condemning divorce and the breakdown of traditional marriage. Rowan didn't attend. Neither did half his ranch hands. The merchants who'd threatened to stop doing business with Iron Ridge found themselves boycotted by ranch wives who'd decided they were done watching women suffer in silence. Blackstone Valley was tearing itself apart, and Clara stood at the center of the storm, watching everything she'd been taught about her place in the world get ripped to pieces. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was necessary. 1 week before the trial, Clara found Rowan in the barn late at night, brushing down his horse with the methodical care of a man avoiding his own thoughts. Can't sleep? He glanced over. Thinking too much. About the trial? About what happens after. Clara leaned against the stall. After I win or after I lose? After you win. He said it with certainty, like losing wasn't an option. You'll be free, legally free, free to go anywhere, do anything. That scare you? Terrifies me. The honesty caught her off guard. Rowan wasn't a man who admitted fear easily. Why? He set down the brush and faced her fully. Because I'm in love with you, and I don't have any right to be. The barn went very quiet. Clara's heart stopped, stuttered, started again at double speed. You can't say that. Too late. Already said it. People will think, will, let them think. I'm done pretending I don't feel what I feel. He took a step closer. I didn't plan this, didn't want it, didn't ask for it. But somewhere between firing Earl and watching you stand up to him in the rain, I fell completely in love with you. I'm still married, legally, not in any way that matters. The trial will happen regardless. This doesn't change that. Clara pressed her hands against her face. This is insane. Probably. We can't. I know. Then why tell me? Rowan was quiet for a moment. Because you deserve to know someone sees you. Not as a victim, not as a problem to solve, just you, Clara. And thinks you're worth everything. Tears burned behind Clara's eyes. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Be loved, without fear. Then we'll figure it out together. After the trial. After you're free. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility. She wanted to kiss him. Wanted to fall into his arms and let someone else carry the weight for a while. Instead, she took a shaky breath and stepped back. Ask me again after the trial. That a yes? It's a maybe, which is more than I've given anyone in 13 years. Rowan smiled, that rare transformative thing. I'll take a maybe. They stood there in the lamplight, two people who'd survived their own private wars, not touching, but not quite separate either. Tomorrow they'd face the town's judgment. But tonight, for just a moment, Clara let herself imagine a future that didn't include fear. It felt like flying. The morning of the trial dawned cold and clear, the kind of sky that seemed to mock human drama with its indifference. Clara dressed carefully in the plainest dress she owned, Elizabeth's suggestion to avoid looking like she was trying to seduce anyone, and braided her hair tight enough to hurt. Margaret appeared with breakfast Clara couldn't eat. You're going to be fine. You can't know that. I can, and I do. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, and I've met some formidable women. I don't feel strong. Strong people never do. That's how you know it's real. Rowan drove them to town in the wagon, Elizabeth beside him going over last-minute strategy. The ranch hands followed on horseback, an armed escort that made Clara feel both protected and conspicuous. Blackstone Valley's courthouse was a squat brick building that smelled like old wood and older prejudices. People packed the gallery, some supporting Clara, most just there for the show. Earl sat at the defendant's table looking sober and respectable in a borrowed suit, playing the part of the wronged husband with practiced ease. His lawyer, Martin Griggs, was a fat man with shrewd eyes who'd built his career defending powerful men against accusations they absolutely deserved. The judge entered, Judge Horace Blackwell, 70 if he was a day, with a face like carved granite. Everyone stood. Clara's hands shook so badly she had to grip the table edge. Elizabeth leaned close. Remember, tell the truth. Don't apologize. You did nothing wrong. The trial began. Griggs painted a picture of Earl as a hardworking man driven to occasional frustration by a difficult, ungrateful wife. Of Clara as a woman who'd seduced a wealthy rancher to escape her marital duties. We have here, Griggs announced, a tale as old as time. A woman who grew dissatisfied with her humble circumstances and sought to trade up, as it were. Who abandoned her sacred vows for the promise of comfort at Iron Ridge Ranch. Clara listened to herself transformed into a villain and felt rage build like steam in a kettle. Then Elizabeth stood. Your Honor, the defense would like to call Clara Whitmore to the stand. Clara walked to the witness box on legs that felt disconnected from her body. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The truth was all she had left. Elizabeth started gentle. Name, age, how long she'd been married. Then, Mrs. Whitmore, why are you seeking a divorce? Clara took a breath. Because my husband beat me for 13 years and I want to live. The courtroom erupted. Judge Blackwell hammered his gavel. Order! Elizabeth continued methodically, walking Clara through years of violence with clinical precision. Each incident documented, each injury cataloged. Clara answered every question, her voice growing stronger with each truth spoken aloud. Then came the cross-examination. Griggs approached like a snake sizing up prey. Mrs. Whitmore, you claim your husband beat you regularly, yet you stayed for 13 years. Why would any rational woman stay in such circumstances? Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? A man half a foot shorter than you? Afraid he'd kill me. He threatened to multiple times. Yet here you are, alive and well, living in luxury at Iron Ridge Ranch with a man who's conveniently fallen in love with you. Elizabeth objected. The judge sustained, but Griggs had planted the seed. Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitmore, that you and Mr. Cade have been conducting an affair? No. You're living under his roof without your husband because my husband was beating me. Sharing his protection, his resources, his company, because he's a decent human being. A decent human being who happens to be in love with you, according to testimony we've heard. Clara's heart hammered. Someone had talked. Someone had overheard the barn conversation. She met Griggs's eyes. Rowan Cade saved my life. Whatever he feels is his business. And what do you feel, Mrs. Whitmore? Elizabeth objected again. Relevance, Your Honor? I'll allow it, Judge Blackwell said. Answer the question, Mrs. Whitmore. Clara looked at Earl sitting there in his borrowed respectability. Then she looked at Rowan in the gallery, his face carefully neutral. And she told the truth. I feel grateful. I feel safe for the first time in 13 years. And yes, I feel something that might be love. But that doesn't change what my husband did to me. It doesn't erase the beatings or the terror or the years I spent wishing I was dead. The courtroom went silent. No further questions, Griggs said, looking satisfied. Clara left the stand feeling flayed open, every private thing exposed. But she'd told the truth. The rest of the trial blurred. Witnesses testified. Doctors confirmed old injuries. Ranch hands described Clara's bruises. Earl took the stand and lied beautifully, painting himself as a flawed but faithful husband driven to occasional discipline by a difficult wife. I loved her, he said, actual tears in his eyes. Still do, and I just want my wife back. Clara watched the gallery and saw some people nodding, buying it. Her stomach turned. Finally, closing arguments. Griggs argued tradition, sanctity of marriage, the dangerous precedent of allowing women to abandon their vows. Elizabeth argued survival, human dignity, and the right to live without fear. Judge Blackwell listened to both, his face revealing nothing. "I'll take this under advisement," he finally said. "Decision in 3 days." 3 days of waiting. 3 days of wondering if telling the truth had been enough. 3 days of watching Blackstone Valley hold its breath, waiting to see which way justice would fall. Clara spent those days at Iron Ridge, unable to eat or sleep, working herself to exhaustion in the kitchen to avoid thinking. Rowan gave her space but stayed close enough that she knew he was there. On the third day, the summons came. The judge had reached his decision. The courthouse smelled different on decision day, sharper somehow, like fear had a scent all its own. Clara sat between Elizabeth and Margaret in the front row, hands folded so tight her knuckles had gone white. Behind her, the gallery was packed tighter than Sunday service, every seat claimed, people standing along the walls. This wasn't just about her anymore. Everyone knew it. Rowan sat 3 rows back with his ranch hands, close enough that Clara could feel his presence but far enough to avoid feeding gossip. Not that it mattered. The whole territory had already decided they were lovers, conspirators, homewreckers. The truth was boring compared to what people wanted to believe. Earl sat at the defendant's table looking hungover and mean, his borrowed suit wrinkled now, the respectable husband costume wearing thin. His lawyer Griggs kept whispering to him, probably telling him to look sympathetic. Earl wasn't built for sympathy. Rage was his natural state, barely contained even now. The bailiff stood. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Horace Blackwell." Everyone stood in a wave of rustling fabric and creaking wood. Clara's legs felt like water. Judge Blackwell entered with the slow deliberation of a man who understood the weight of moments. He was 73. Been on the bench for 26 years, seen every kind of human ugliness the frontier could produce. His face gave away nothing, carved from granite and stubbornness. He settled into his chair. Everyone sat. The silence felt alive, breathing. "I've spent 3 days reviewing testimony and evidence in the matter of Whitmore versus Whitmore," the judge began, his voice gravelly with age. "This is not a simple case. Marriage is a sacred institution, the foundation of civilized society. When a woman seeks to dissolve that bond, she carries a heavy burden of proof." Clara's stomach dropped. This was it. He was going to rule against her. "However," Judge Blackwell continued, and that single word cracked through the courtroom like lightning, "the testimony presented here depicts not a marriage but a prolonged assault. Medical evidence confirms a pattern of injury consistent with severe physical abuse spanning more than a decade." Someone gasped. Clara couldn't breathe. "Mr. Whitmore claims he was driven to discipline by a difficult wife. But discipline and brutality are not synonymous. A man who breaks his wife's ribs, blackens her eyes, and threatens her life is not exercising marital authority. He is committing assault." Earl half stood. Griggs yanked him back down. Furthermore, the suggestion that Mrs. Whitmore sought this divorce in order to pursue an illicit relationship lacks credible evidence. What the evidence does show is a woman who endured violence until she could find safe harbor, and a rancher who offered that harbor at considerable personal cost. Judge Blackwell looked directly at Clara for the first time. Mrs. Whitmore approached the bench. Clara's legs barely held her as she stood. Elizabeth touched her arm, a brief steadying pressure, and she walked forward on autopilot. The judge's eyes were sharp and knowing, the eyes of a man who'd spent decades sorting lies from truth. "You understand this decision will have consequences beyond your personal situation," he said quietly. "Women across the territory will use this precedent. Men will challenge it. This court will be cited for years to come." Clara's voice came out steadier than she expected. "I understand, Your Honor. And you still believe this is the right course?" She thought about 13 years of walking on eggshells, of hiding bruises, of making herself small enough to survive, of the woman she'd been before Earl, barely remembered now, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. "I believe surviving is not the same as living, and I deserve more than fear." The courtroom held its breath. Judge Blackwell nodded once, something almost like approval flickering across his weathered face. "Return to your seat." Clara walked back, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The judge picked up his gavel. "It is the ruling of this court that the marriage between Earl Whitmore and Clara Whitmore is hereby dissolved. Mrs. Whitmore is granted a decree of divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty and endangerment. Mr. Whitmore is ordered to maintain a distance of no less than 100 yards, from Mrs. Whitmore at all times. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. The gavel fell. That sound, wood striking wood, changed everything. The courtroom erupted, people shouting, some applauding, others yelling about the death of decency and the collapse of traditional values. Earl was on his feet screaming something incomprehensible, his face purple with rage. Griggs tried to calm him. The bailiff moved forward, hand on his weapon. Clara couldn't move, couldn't process. The words kept echoing. Marriage dissolved, decree of divorce. You are free. Free. After 13 years, she was free. Margaret pulled her into a fierce hug. You did it! You actually did it! Elizabeth was grinning, professional composure cracking. Precedent-setting decision. This is going to change things, Clara. Really change things. But Clara barely heard them. She was watching Earl being restrained by the bailiff, still screaming, spittle flying from his mouth. The man who'd controlled her life for 13 years reduced to a raging child throwing a tantrum because he'd lost his favorite toy. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked pathetic. Rowan appeared at her elbow, his presence solid and real. You all right? Clara turned to face him, and something inside her chest that had been clenched tight for years finally loosened. I'm free. His smile was sunrise breaking over mountains. Yeah, you are. They walked out of that courthouse into afternoon sunlight that felt different somehow, sharper, cleaner, like the world had been washed new. People clustered on the steps, some congratulating her, others glaring like she'd committed murder instead of escaping it. A woman Clara vaguely recognized from church approached, eyes red with crying. Thank you, she whispered. My husband, he's like Earl. I didn't know I could leave. I didn't know it was possible. Before Clara could respond, the woman hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. Margaret squeezed Clara's hand. You just gave that woman hope. Probably not the only one either. I didn't mean to start anything. Too late. You already did. The ranch hands surrounded them, creating a protective barrier against both supporters and protesters. They formed up like a military escort, rifles visible, faces set with the kind of determination that made smart people step aside. Let's get you home, Rowan said quietly. Home. Iron Ridge Ranch. The place that had been temporary shelter and had somehow become the first place she'd felt safe in over a decade. They were halfway to the wagon when Earl broke free from the bailiff. He came at Clara like a bull, pure rage and momentum, murder in his bloodshot eyes. People screamed. Rowan moved fast, but not fast enough. Clara turned to face her former husband, and for the first time in 13 years, she didn't flinch. Her hand came up instinctively, not to protect herself, but to strike. The slap connected with Earl's face so hard, the sound cracked across the courthouse steps like a gunshot. Everything stopped. Earl staggered backward, more from shock than impact, hand pressed to his reddening cheek. Blood trickled from his split lip. He stared at Clara like she'd transformed into something unrecognizable. She stared back, breathing hard, her palms stinging. Don't ever touch me again, she said, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. Don't look at me. Don't speak to me. You had 13 years to break me, Earl. You failed. Then Rowan was between them, rifle raised, and 6 ranch hands had their weapons trained on Earl, and the moment shattered into chaos. The bailiff grabbed Earl, hauling him backward. That's assault. You're under arrest. She hit me, Earl was screaming, spittle and blood flying. You all saw it. She attacked me. After you charged her, Judge Blackwell's voice cut through the noise. The old judge stood on the courthouse steps, having witnessed everything. Self-defense. Mrs. Whitmore defended herself from an aggressor. Bailiff, remove Mr. Whitmore from the premises. Immediately. Earl fought like a wild animal as they dragged him away, cursing Clara, cursing Rowan, cursing the judge and the law, and every person who'd stood against him. Clara watched him go and felt nothing. No fear, no guilt, no lingering attachment, just a vast, empty relief, like setting down a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Her hand throbbed. She looked down at her palm, red and swelling. That's going to bruise, Margaret observed. Worth it. Rowan made a sound that might have been a laugh. Remind me never to make you that angry. You're not him. No, he agreed. I'm not. They made it to the wagon this time without further incident, though the crowd pressed close, everyone wanting to touch her, talk to her, claim some piece of what had just happened. Clara let Elizabeth and Margaret handle them, too wrung out to process any more human interaction. The ride back to Iron Ridge Ranch was quiet. Clara sat between Rowan and Margaret, watching the familiar landscape roll past. Mountains rising in the distance, prairie grass bending in the wind, sky so big it hurt to look at. She'd seen this view 1,000 times as Earl's wife, always through the lens of what she'd lost, what she'd never have. Now she saw it as Clara Whitmore. Just Clara. Nobody's property, nobody's victim, free. The word kept circling her mind like a bird looking for a place to land. Back at the ranch, the Cowboys had prepared a celebration. Nothing fancy, just food and music and the kind of rough, genuine affection these men specialized in. They treated Clara like she'd won a war instead of a court case. Maybe she had. Pete Donovan played fiddle. Tommy Bledsoe produced a harmonica from somewhere. Someone passed around whiskey that burned going down and warmed everything after. Clara found herself pulled into dances she didn't know the steps to, laughing for the first time in recent memory, real laughter that came from somewhere deep and unfamiliar. Margaret watched from the porch, approving and maternal. Elizabeth had stayed in town to handle paperwork, but she'd promised to visit in a few days to discuss what came next. What came next? Clara had no idea. Freedom was terrifying when you'd never had it before. As the celebration wound down and men drifted off to bunkhouses or evening chores, Clara found herself alone on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky bled orange and pink and purple, colors so vivid they seemed impossible. Rowan appeared beside her with 2 cups of coffee. Figured you might need this. Thanks. She took the cup, grateful for the warmth. Today was a lot. Yeah. They stood in comfortable silence, watching light drain from the sky. Clara's hand still throbbed where she'd slapped Earl. She kept flexing her fingers, marveling at the evidence of her own violence. I hit him, she said quietly. You defended yourself. I wanted to hurt him. When my hand connected with his face, I wanted it to hurt. That make you a bad person? Clara considered. I don't know, maybe. Or maybe it makes you human. You're allowed to be angry, Clara. You're allowed to want the man who terrorized you to feel even a fraction of what you felt. Is that what you wanted when your wife died? Rowan was quiet for a long time. Clara thought maybe she'd pushed too far, asked something too personal. Then he spoke. When Sarah died, I wanted to burn the world down. Wanted to hurt everyone who got to keep their wives when mine was gone. Spent 2 years drinking and picking fights and being the kind of man people crossed the street to avoid. What changed? I got tired. Anger's exhausting. Eventually you have to decide whether you want to spend your life punishing the world or building something better in spite of it. Clara thought about that. About Earl rotting in whatever hole he'd crawl into after this. About the years she'd lost. About the woman she might have been if she'd married someone kind instead of someone cruel. I don't know how to build something better, she admitted. I've spent 13 years surviving. I don't know what comes after survival. Nobody does. That's the thing about freedom. It doesn't come with instructions. Helpful. Rowan smiled. You'll figure it out. You're smarter than you think. How do you know? Because you survived Earl Whitmore for 13 years and came out the other side still capable of kindness. That takes more than intelligence. That takes strength most people never need to find. Clara's throat tightened. You have a lot of faith in someone you barely know. I know enough. The sun had set fully now, darkness rushing in to fill the spaces between stars. The ranch settled into nighttime rhythms, horses shifting in stables, cattle lowing in distant pastures, the small sounds of a working ranch preparing for sleep. I should go inside, Clara said, not moving. Probably. Neither of them moved. Rowan? Yeah? In the barn. Before the trial. You said you loved me. His posture didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. I remember. Did you mean it? Every word! Clara turned to face him fully. In the darkness she could barely see his expression, just the outline of him against the stars. I told you to ask me again after the trial. I remember that too. Well, the trial's over. Rowan set down his coffee carefully, like it was something precious that might shatter. Clara Whitmore, are you saying, I'm saying ask me. He was quiet for a moment, and Clara could feel her heart hammering, could feel the enormity of this moment pressing down like atmosphere. Then Rowan took her hand, the one that was bruised from slapping Earl, the one that carried evidence of her own capacity for violence, and held it gently. I'm not good at pretty words. Never have been. But I see you. I see your strength and your kindness and the way you've survived things that would have broken most people. I see how you take care of the ranch hands like their family, how you're learning to laugh again, how you're becoming yourself instead of who Earl wanted you to be. He paused, gathering words like stones. I love you. Not because you need saving, you saved yourself, but because you're worth loving, Clara. And I'm asking if you might consider letting me try to deserve you. Clara felt tears tracking down her face, warm and unexpected. That was pretty good for someone who's not good at pretty words. Is that a yes? It's a maybe working its way toward yes. I need time, Rowan. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not afraid, when I'm not defined by what Earl did to me. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. You might change your mind when you get to know the real me instead of the broken version. You're not broken. Damaged, maybe. Healing, definitely. But not broken. Clara wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe she was capable of being loved without fear, of building something good instead of just surviving something bad. Can I ask you something? Anything. Will you kiss me? Just once. So I know what it feels like when it's my choice. Rowan cupped her face gently, thumb brushing away tears. You're sure? I'm terrified. But yes. He kissed her soft and careful, like she was something precious. Nothing demanding, nothing taking, just the gentle pressure of his lips against hers, asking instead of claiming. Clara felt something inside her chest crack open, not breaking, but blooming, like frozen ground finally feeling spring. When they pulled apart, she was crying harder, but it wasn't sad crying. It was relief. It was release. It was 13 years of fear finally draining away. Okay, she whispered. Okay? Okay, I'll try. I'll try to love you back. I'll try to build something better. I'll try to be more than what Earl made me. Rowan pulled her close, and Clara let herself be held. Really held, for the first time in memory. No violence, no ulterior motives, just warmth and safety, and the steady beat of his heart against her ear. They stood like that while the stars wheeled overhead and the ranch settled into sleep and the future waited, patient and unknowable. The next weeks were strange. Clara kept expecting Earl to reappear, kept jumping at shadows, kept waiting for the other boot to drop. But he stayed gone, reportedly drinking himself to death in a boarding house on the other side of the valley. The restraining order meant he couldn't come within 100 yards of her, and he was too much of a coward to risk jail. Without him looming over everything, Clara started to breathe. She took over management of the ranch kitchen officially, with real wages and actual authority. She reorganized the supply system, negotiated better prices with merchants in town, started teaching the younger ranch hands how to cook basic meals so they wouldn't starve when they eventually left for their own homesteads. Margaret watched her transformation with fierce pride. You're good at this, managing people, solving problems. You should have been running things years ago. Earl wouldn't have allowed it. Earl's not here anymore. No, he wasn't. And every day his absence felt more like freedom and less like temporary reprieve. Women started showing up at Iron Ridge, quietly at first. 1 or 2 a week, always with some excuse, delivering baked goods, asking about ranch work, claiming they were just passing through. But Clara knew why they really came. They wanted to see proof that escape was possible, that a woman could stand up to her husband and the law and the entire weight of frontier tradition and survive. She welcomed them all, offered coffee and conversation and the kind of understanding that only came from lived experience. Some wanted advice. Some just wanted to talk to someone who understood. A few wanted help leaving their own bad marriages. Clara helped where she could, connected them with Elizabeth Chambers, offered temporary shelter at Iron Ridge for the ones in immediate danger, started building a quiet network of women supporting women, passing information about sympathetic judges and safe houses, and how to hide money where violent husbands couldn't find it. You're starting a revolution, Elizabeth told her during one of her visits. I'm just helping people. Same thing sometimes. The town remained divided. Reverend Thomas continued condemning her from the pulpit, But attendance at his church had dropped noticeably. Women who'd spent years enduring his sermons about wifely obedience stopped showing up. They went to Iron Ridge instead. Clara became something she'd never intended to be. A symbol of resistance, of survival, of the possibility that things could change. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Through it all, Rowan was steady. He didn't push for more than she could give, didn't demand declarations or promises, just stayed close, solid as bedrock, letting her set the pace. They'd have dinner together most evenings, talking about the ranch, about the women who'd visited, about nothing in particular. Sometimes he'd hold her hand, sometimes they'd kiss on the porch under the stars. Sometimes she'd wake from nightmares and find him on the porch keeping watch, giving her space but making sure she knew she wasn't alone. "You don't have to do this," she told him one night after a particularly bad dream had left her shaking. "I know. I might be broken forever. I might never be the kind of wife you deserve. You're not broken, and I don't want a wife. I want you. What if that's not enough? Then we'll figure it out. Together." 3 months after the trial, Earl violated the restraining order. He showed up at Iron Ridge drunk and armed, screaming for Clara to come out and face him like a woman instead of hiding behind other men. Clara was in the kitchen when Margaret came running. "It's Earl. He's got a rifle." Everything inside Clara went cold and sharp. She'd known this was coming. Known Earl wouldn't let her go without one final attempt to reclaim control. She walked out onto the porch. Rowan was already there with 6 ranch hands, all armed, forming a wall between Earl and the house. But Clara pushed through them, ignoring Rowan's protests. Earl stood 30 yards out, swaying, rifle pointed at the ground, but clearly ready to raise it. "There she is," he slurred, "my faithless wife." "Former wife," Clara corrected, her voice steady. "The law dissolved our marriage, remember? That piece of paper doesn't mean nothing. You're mine. You'll always be mine." "I was never yours, Earl. You just convinced me I was." "You owe me." He was screaming now, spittle flying. 13 years I fed you, clothed you, gave you a home. You beat me. You terrorized me. You made me wish I was dead. That's not giving. That's taking." Earl raised the rifle. Every gun behind Clara cocked simultaneously. "Don't do it, Earl." Rowan's voice was quiet but carried. "You pull that trigger, you don't leave this ranch alive." "Maybe I don't care. Maybe I'd rather die than watch her play house with you." "Then that's your choice. But you don't get to take her with you." For a moment, Clara thought he'd do it, thought she'd watch Earl choose murder-suicide over letting her go. The man she'd been married to for 13 years, reduced to this, a drunk with a rifle and terminal entitlement. She felt pity, sharp and unexpected. "Earl," she said quietly, "you can put down the gun and walk away. Start over somewhere else. Find a woman who actually wants to be with you instead of one you have to force. Or you can pull that trigger and die right here in the mud. Either way, I'm done being afraid of you." "You should be afraid. You should be begging." "I'm not begging. Not ever again." Something in her voice must have gotten through because Earl's rifle wavered. He looked at her, really looked at her, and whatever he saw made him falter. The woman he'd married 13 years ago was gone, beaten out of existence by his own hands. What stood in her place was someone he didn't recognize, someone who wouldn't flinch, wouldn't break, wouldn't give him the fear he needed to feel powerful. His rifle lowered. "This ain't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes, it is." The sheriff arrived then. Someone had sent for him the moment Earl appeared. He arrested Earl for violating the restraining order, for threatening violence, for drunk and disorderly conduct. As they hauled him away, Earl kept twisting around to look at Clara, like he still couldn't quite believe she was real, that she'd stood up to him, that she'd won. Clara watched until the sheriff's wagon disappeared down the road, then her legs gave out. Rowan caught her before she hit the porch. "I've got you." "I'm okay. You're shaking." "That's different." He carried her inside despite her protests, settled her in a chair by the fire. Margaret appeared with tea liberally dosed with whiskey. The ranch hands dispersed, muttering about Earl's stupidity and Clara's courage. When they were alone, Clara finally let herself feel the terror she'd held at bay while facing down a loaded rifle. "He could have killed me, but he didn't. He wanted to. I saw it in his eyes." "And you stood there anyway." Rowan knelt beside her chair. "You were incredible." "I was terrified." Courage isn't not being scared, it's being scared and doing the thing anyway. Clara laughed shakily. Where'd you hear that? Made it up just now. Sounded good though, right? Terrible. Well, I tried. They sat there while Clara's shaking slowly subsided, replaced by exhaustion so profound she could barely keep her eyes open. He'll go to jail, Rowan said. Judge Blackwell won't let this slide. Violating a restraining order with a weapon? Earl's looking at serious time. Good. Clara meant it. No guilt, no second thoughts, just relief that Earl would be somewhere he couldn't hurt her. What do you need right now? Clara thought about it. About what she actually needed instead of what she thought she should need. Stay with me, just for tonight. I don't want to be alone. I can do that. He stayed, fully clothed, completely respectful, just his presence in the chair beside her bed while she finally slept without nightmares for the first time in weeks. When she woke in the morning, he was still there. Earl got 5 years for assault with a deadly weapon, violation of a restraining order, and a list of other charges Elizabeth made sure were included. 5 years in territorial prison, far enough away that he couldn't easily come back even after his release. Clara attended the sentencing and felt nothing but relief when the judge handed down the verdict. Earl screamed threats as they dragged him away. Clara didn't flinch. Outside the courthouse, the same woman who'd thanked her months ago approached again, this time with 3 friends. We left, she said simply. All of us. We left our husbands and were filing for divorce. Because of you. Because you showed us it was possible. Clara didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process being someone's inspiration when she still felt like she was barely holding herself together most days. I'm proud of you, was all she could manage. We're proud of you too. They walked away, 4 women who'd found courage in Clara's example, and Clara felt the weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders. Elizabeth appeared at her elbow. You're changing things. Real, meaningful change. Courts across the territory are citing your case as precedent. Women are leaving abusive marriages in numbers we've never seen before. I just wanted to survive. And now you're helping others survive too. That's not nothing, Clara. Maybe it wasn't. Spring came to Montana with the subtlety of a charging bull. One day, snow, the next day, mud. Then suddenly grass greening and flowers blooming like the world had been holding its breath all winter. Clara stood on the porch of Iron Ridge Ranch, watching calves chase each other across the pasture. New life everywhere she looked, and felt something inside her chest that took a moment to identify. Joy. Not happiness exactly. That still felt too fragile, too easily shattered. But joy. Deep and quiet. And growing. Rowan came up behind her, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, comfortable now with casual touch in a way that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. What are you thinking about? He asked. How different everything is. Good different or scary different? Both. They stood there watching the ranch wake up to spring, and Clara let herself imagine a future that extended beyond tomorrow. A future with Rowan. With the ranch. With the network of women she was helping build. A future that was hers. Marry me, Rowan said quietly. Clara's breath caught. What? Marry me. When you're ready, no rush. But I want you to know, I want forever with you, Clara. However long it takes you to trust that. She turned to face him, searching his eyes for any hint of the control that had defined her first marriage. All she found was patience and love and the kind of steadiness that didn't demand or take. Ask me next spring, she said, when I've had a full year of freedom, when I know who I am without Earl's shadow over everything. Ask me then. That's not a no. That's a maybe getting closer to yes. Rowan smiled, that rare, transformative thing that made her heart skip. I can work with maybe. He kissed her there on the porch with the spring wind blowing and the ranch spreading out around them like possibility made solid, and Clara finally let herself believe in second chances. Not because someone rescued her, but because she'd rescued herself, and love had given her a reason to keep fighting when the fighting got hard. Earl was in prison. The divorce was final. She was legally, completely, undeniably free. And for the first time in 13 years, Clara Whitmore knew exactly what that freedom was worth. Everything. The year that followed moved like water finding its level. Not smooth, not perfect, but steady in a way Clara had never experienced. She learned the ranch business from the ground up, not just kitchen management, but cattle inventory, grazing rotation, water rights negotiations with neighboring spreads. Rowan taught her to read ledgers and spot problems before they became catastrophes. She had a mind for numbers, it turned out, sharper than anyone had given her credit for. "You're better at this than half the ranchers in the valley," Rowan told her one evening as they reviewed quarterly accounts. "You see patterns I miss. You taught me everything I know. I taught you the basics. The rest is all you." Clara studied the columns of figures, satisfaction blooming in her chest. This was hers, not because a husband permitted it, but because she'd earned it through work and intelligence and refusing to believe she was too stupid to learn. Earl had told her for 13 years she was worthless. Turned out he'd been wrong about a lot of things. The network of women escaping bad marriages grew quietly but persistently. Word spread through whispered conversations and passed notes. Women would show up at Iron Ridge with black eyes and broken ribs, carrying children and whatever belongings they could grab. Clara gave them shelter, food, connections to Elizabeth Chambers, and the kind of fierce protection that came from understanding exactly what they'd survived. "You're running an underground railroad for abused wives," Margaret observed one morning after Clara had helped a woman and her 3 children disappear to Cheyenne overnight. "I'm just helping people." That's what they said too, and it changed everything. By summer, Clara had helped 17 women leave violent marriages. 3 had successfully divorced. The others were in various stages of legal proceedings, hiding in safe houses across the territory while lawyers built their cases. The backlash was predictable. Town council members accused Clara of destroying families. Reverend Thomas preached entire sermons about her corrupting influence. Merchants who'd started doing business with Iron Ridge again withdrew their trade. Rowan's response was characteristically direct. "Any merchant who won't sell to us because we help women escape getting beaten to death can find another ranch to do business with. We'll take our money elsewhere." And they did. Iron Ridge was the largest cattle operation in the valley. When Rowan moved his business to merchants in the next town over, others followed. Within 3 months, half the stores in Blackstone Valley were struggling. The economic pressure worked where morality hadn't. Merchants started quietly reaching out, willing to look the other way regarding Clara's activities if it meant Iron Ridge trade returned. "Capitalism beats conscience every time," Elizabeth said during one of her visits. Not noble, but effective. Clara watched the valley reshape itself around this new reality and felt something like power. Not the violent, controlling power Earl had wielded, but the power of refusal. The power of women saying no and meaning it. The power of economic leverage used for something other than profit. It felt good. It felt dangerous. It felt necessary. Her father showed up in August. Clara was working in the garden, something she'd started because she liked watching things grow, when Margaret called her to the house. A man was waiting on the porch, weathered and gray, hat in his hands. William Hartley, her father, who'd given her to Earl Whitmore 14 years ago like she was cattle being traded and hadn't spoken to her since. Clara wiped dirt from her hands and walked to the porch, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. "Papa?" "Clara." He looked older than she remembered, carved down by whatever hard years he'd lived. "You look well." "I am well." Awkward silence stretched between them, all the years of absence filling the space where conversation should be. "I came to apologize," William finally said, "for giving you to Earl, for not protecting you, for being a coward when you needed a father." Clara had imagined this conversation 1,000 times. In her imagination, she'd been angry, righteous, had told him exactly what his cowardice had cost her. Standing here looking at this broken old man, she just felt tired. "Why now?" "Because I heard what you've been doing, helping those women, standing up to the whole valley, being braver than I ever was." He met her eyes. "You're a better person than I raised you to be. That's all you. None of it's me." "You're right. It's not." He flinched like she'd hit him. Clara felt a flicker of satisfaction, quickly followed by guilt. This was her father, the man who'd taught her to ride, who'd read her stories before bed, before her mother died, and something in him died too. "I don't forgive you," she said carefully. "I'm not there yet. Maybe never will be. You gave me to a monster and walked away." "I know. But you're here now. That's something." William's eyes were wet. "Is it enough?" "I don't know yet." Ask me in a year. He nodded slowly, accepting the boundary she'd drawn. Can I visit? Sometimes. Not to fix things, just to know you. Clara thought about it. About the daughter she might have someday, whether she'd want that child to know its grandfather. About forgiveness and accountability and how people could be both terrible and human simultaneously. Sundays, she said, you can come for Sunday dinner if you're sober and respectful. I can do that. And Papa? You ever hear about a woman needing help getting away from a bad husband? You send her here. You owe me that much. I owe you everything. Then pay it forward. He left with the tentative relief of a man granted parole, and Clara stood on the porch feeling strange. Not happy exactly, not healed, but maybe starting to understand that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing what weight to carry and what to set down. Margaret appeared at her elbow. That took courage. Or stupidity, haven't decided which. Can be both. Usually is. September brought the first hard frost in a letter from Elizabeth. Clara read it twice, not quite believing the words. What is it? Rowan asked, watching her face. The territorial legislature. They're proposing new marriage laws, making it easier for women to file for divorce in cases of abuse. Elizabeth says my case is being cited as primary justification. That's good, right? It's terrifying. What if I'm not strong enough to be a symbol? What if I let people down? Rowan took the letter from her shaking hands. You already are a symbol. Have been since that courtroom. Question isn't whether you're strong enough. You've proved that. Question is whether you're willing to keep being visible when it gets hard. Clara thought about the 17 women she'd helped. The letters she got from women across the territory thanking her for showing them escape was possible. The way Blackstone Valley had changed, however reluctantly, because she'd refused to stay quiet. I'm willing. Then the rest is just showing up. The legislative hearing was scheduled for October in Helena. Elizabeth wanted Clara to testify about her experiences, to give lawmakers a human face to attach to the proposed reforms. Clara agreed before she could talk herself out of it. The night before they left for Helena, she couldn't sleep. Rowan found her on the porch at 2 a.m, wrapped in blankets against the cold. You're going to be fine tomorrow. You can't know that. I know you faced worse than a room full of politicians. Clara laughed despite her nerves. Politicians might be worse than Earl. At least Earl was honest about being terrible. Rowan settled beside her, solid and warm. They'd been dancing around commitment for months now, neither quite willing to push for more than the other could give. But the comfort between them had deepened into something that felt permanent, whether they named it or not. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about next spring. When you want to ask me to marry you again? When I want to know if you're ready to say yes. Clara pulled the blanket tighter. What if I'm never ready? What if Earl broke something in me that doesn't fix? Then we live together unwed and let people talk. I don't need a piece of paper, Clara. I need you. However that looks. She turned to face him. You say that now, but what about 10 years from now? 20? When you're old and dying and you don't have legal claim to anything because your partner never trusted you enough to marry you? Then I'll die knowing I spent my life with someone I loved. That's enough. It's not fair to you. Let me worry about what's fair to me. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to push him away before she could disappoint him, but she was tired of being afraid, tired of letting Earl's ghost dictate her future. Ask me tomorrow, she said quietly. After the hearing, after I've done this last hard thing, ask me then and I'll give you a real answer. Deal. They sat there until dawn, watching stars fade into morning, two people who'd survived their own private wars finding something like peace in the space between words. Helena was bigger than anything Clara had experienced, a real city with paved streets and electric lights, and more people than she'd seen in her entire life combined. The territorial capitol building was massive stone and marble, designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. It worked. Clara felt about 3 feet tall walking up those steps. Elizabeth met them at the entrance, all business. You'll testify third. I'll question you. Keep your answers short and honest. Don't let them make you angry. What if I am angry? Then use it, but don't lose control. The hearing room was packed. Legislators, journalists, citizens both supporting and opposing the reforms. Clara recognized several women she'd helped, sitting in the gallery as silent support. The first two witnesses were doctors who testified about patterns of injury in abused women. Clinical, statistical, removing emotion from violence. Then Elizabeth called Clara to the stand. Walking to that witness chair felt like walking to her own execution. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. She could hear whispers. That's her. The Whitmore woman, the one who started all this. She sat down and placed her hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. The truth was all she had. Elizabeth started gentle, establishing Clara's background. Then, Mrs. Whitmore, why are these reforms necessary? Clara took a breath. Because women are dying. They're dying in their own homes at the hands of men who claim to love them, and the law treats it like a private matter. Like a man has the right to beat his wife as long as he doesn't kill her, and sometimes even when he does. You speak from experience. I survived 13 years with a man who broke my ribs, blackened my eyes, threatened my life. I survived because I got lucky, because a rancher decided to help me, because a female lawyer took my case, because a judge was willing to set precedent. She looked at the legislators. Most women don't get lucky. Most women die or live in terror until they're too broken to leave. These reforms won't fix everything, but they might save some lives. A legislator stood, Congressman Peters, known opponent of the reforms. Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it true that you're now living with the rancher who helped you? That you've essentially traded one man for another? Elizabeth objected. Relevance? I'm establishing credibility. This woman claims abuse, but she seems to have landed quite comfortably. Clara felt rage building, but kept her voice level. I'm not living with Rowan Cade because I traded one master for another. I'm living at Iron Ridge Ranch because I work there. I manage the kitchen and help with ranch accounts. I earn wages. I have my own room. And yes, we have romantic feelings for each other, but that relationship is built on choice and respect, not violence and control. So you admit you're involved with him. I admit I'm in love with him. I also admit I was terrified to love anyone after what Earl did to me. But Rowan Cade never hit me, never threatened me, never made me feel small. That's not trading one man for another. That's learning the difference between abuse and partnership. The room erupted. Peters tried to continue, but the gallery's reaction drowned him out. The chairman hammered for order. When things settled, Elizabeth asked her final question. What would you say to legislators who believe these reforms undermine traditional marriage? Clara looked directly at the men who held women's lives in their political calculations. I'd say marriage built on violence isn't traditional. It's criminal. I'd say if your idea of tradition requires women to endure being beaten, your tradition deserves to die. And I'd say that every woman in this room, in this territory, in this country, deserves the legal right to choose life over death. That's not radical, that's human. The silence that followed was absolute. No further questions, Elizabeth said. Clara left the stand on shaking legs, sat down between Rowan and Margaret, and tried to remember how to breathe. The hearing continued for hours. More testimony, more statistics, politicians grandstanding about family values and moral decay. But Clara's words had cut through the noise, given the abstract debate a human face impossible to ignore. The vote came 3 days later. The reforms passed by a narrow margin. Not perfect legislation, compromised and watered down in committee, but enough to matter. Enough to make it easier for women to file for abuse-based divorce. Enough to establish that violence wasn't a husband's right. Enough to save lives. Elizabeth found Clara in the hotel restaurant where she'd been stress-eating bread. We won. I heard. You know what this means? Your testimony changed votes. Women across Montana will have legal protection because you were willing to stand up there and tell the truth. Clara felt tears burning. I was so scared. I know. You did it anyway. That's what makes it brave. That evening, back at the hotel, Rowan knocked on her door. Clara let him in, suddenly nervous in a way that had nothing to do with politics. You said I could ask you after the hearing, he said without preamble. I did. Well, the hearing's over. You were incredible. You changed laws. You're literally making history. Don't oversell it. I'm not. He took her hands. Clara Whitmore, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you've survived things that would break most people. I love that you take care of ranch hands like they're family. I love that you're learning to laugh again. I love who you're becoming. He paused, gathering courage. Will you marry me? Not because you need protecting, not because society expects it, but because we're better together than apart. Because I want to build a life with you, because you're the first person I want to see in the morning and the last person I want to talk to at night. Clara's throat tightened. A year ago, she would have said no, would have been too scared, too broken, too convinced she was unlovable. But she'd spent a year discovering who she was without Earl's shadow, a year helping other women find freedom, a year learning that love didn't have to hurt. Yes, she whispered. Rowan blinked. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, not because I need rescuing, because I want partnership, because you see me as an equal, because love with you feels like freedom instead of a cage. He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise, and Clara felt the last piece of Earl's control over her life shatter into nothing. She was getting married again, by choice this time, to a man who respected her. It felt like victory. They married in late October beneath an enormous Montana sky with half the territory in attendance. Not a church wedding, Clara was done with institutions that had failed her. Instead, they stood in the ranch yard surrounded by cowboys, ranch wives, former abuse survivors, and the network of women who'd fought beside her. Elizabeth Chambers officiated, legally authorized, and intensely proud. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony. Clara's father stood in the back, sober and respectful, earning his way back into her life one Sunday dinner at a time. Clara wore a simple blue dress instead of white. No pretending at virginity or purity. She'd been married before, had survived violence, was scarred and healing and done apologizing for her past. When Rowan slid the ring on her finger, his hands were shaking. "You're stuck with me now," she whispered. That was the plan. The party afterward was loud and joyful and lasted until dawn. Ranch hands drank too much and told embarrassing stories. Women Clara had helped came up to thank her, to celebrate this visible proof that escape was possible and second chances were real. But the moment Clara remembered most was quieter. Late in the evening, she found herself alone on the porch with Margaret, watching the celebration wind down. "You did good, girl," Margaret said. "I'm scared. What if I mess this up?" "Then you'll mess it up and fix it. That's what marriage is. Two imperfect people choosing each other every day. Earl never chose me. He owned me. Rowan's not Earl, you know that." Clara did know. But 13 years of trauma didn't disappear because you said vows under a pretty sky. Healing was ongoing, messy, full of setbacks. What if I wake up one day and I'm still too broken? Margaret turned to face her fully. "You're not broken. Damaged, maybe. Healing, definitely, but not broken. And Rowan knows what he signed up for. He's choosing you, all of you, including the scared parts and the angry parts and the parts that still flinch sometimes." "How do you know?" "Because I've watched you two for a year and a half. I've seen how he looks at you, how he waits when you need space, how he celebrates when you're strong. That man's in love with exactly who you are right now, not some imaginary healed version." Clara let those words sink in, let herself believe them. Rowan appeared then, slightly drunk and completely happy. "There you are. People are asking for the bride. Let them wait. Bold." He settled beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "You good?" "Getting there." "That's honest." They sat together while the party continued behind them. Three people who'd become family watching the stars come out over Iron Ridge Ranch. This was hers now. Legally, completely, by choice. Ranch manager, wife, symbol of something bigger than herself. It was terrifying and exhilarating and everything she'd never let herself want. Winter arrived with its usual Montana brutality, but Clara barely noticed. She was too busy learning to be married in a way that didn't involve fear. Learning that disagreements could be resolved with conversation instead of violence. Learning that Rowan meant it when he said he wanted partnership. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes she flinched when he moved too fast. Sometimes she woke from nightmares about Earl and couldn't remember where she was. Sometimes the weight of being a symbol for other women felt crushing. But Rowan was patient. The ranch was steady. And slowly, day by day, Clara built a life that felt like hers. News arrived in February that Earl had died in prison, stabbed by another inmate during a fight, dead before anyone could get him to medical care. Clara felt nothing. Then relief. then guilt about the relief, then anger that Earl got to die while she had to live with what he'd done to her. "It's okay to be glad he's dead," Rowan told her that night. "That doesn't make you a bad person." "How do you know?" "Because I'm glad too, and I'm choosing to believe we're both decent people who are relieved a violent man can't hurt anyone else." Clara thought about that. About the women Earl would have hurt if he'd lived. About the fear she could finally release knowing he was permanently gone. "I'm glad," she admitted. "I'm glad he's dead, and I don't have to be afraid anymore." Good. They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd survived different losses finding comfort in honesty. Spring came again, gentler this time, like the world was learning to be kind. Clara's network had grown to cover 3 territories. Elizabeth was arguing landmark cases in territorial Supreme Court. Women everywhere were finding voices they'd been told they didn't have. And Clara was learning to live instead of just survive. She stood on the porch one April morning, watching the sun rise over the mountains, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and earned and hers. Rowan came up behind her, coffee in hand. "Beautiful morning." "Yeah." "You're thinking about something," Clara smiled. "I'm thinking I'm happy. Actually happy. Not just not afraid, but genuinely content with my life." "That's new." "It is." "You gonna tell me what changed?" She turned to face him, this man who'd offered her safety, and then waited while she figured out she was worth more than that. "I stopped waiting for the other boot to drop. Stopped believing happiness was temporary. Started trusting that this is real and I deserve it." Rowan kissed her forehead. "Took you long enough. Some things are worth taking time to believe." They stood there together while the ranch woke up around them. Cattle lowing, horses moving in pastures, ranch hands heading to breakfast. The sounds of life continuing, steady and sure. Clara had spent 13 years convinced she was worthless, 2 years learning she wasn't. And now, finally, she was starting to believe she was worth fighting for. Not because someone else said so, because she'd survived hell and built heaven on the other side. And that kind of strength couldn't be taught or given, only earned through blood and tears and refusing to quit. She was Clara Cade now. Ranch manager, symbol, survivor. And she was done apologizing for taking up space in the world. The years that followed weren't perfect. Clara learned early that healing didn't move in straight lines and happy endings weren't actually endings at all, just new chapters with different problems. But they were hers, built deliberately instead of endured desperately, and that made all the difference. Iron Ridge Ranch expanded into something nobody had quite anticipated. What started as a cattle operation became a kind of sanctuary. Women fleeing violence knew they could find shelter there. Ranch hands learned that working for Rowan and Clara meant signing on to something bigger than moving cattle. It meant protecting people who needed protecting and keeping your mouth shut about who came and went in the night. By the 3rd year of their marriage, they'd helped 43 women escape abusive situations. Some stayed at the ranch long enough to heal and plan. Others passed through quickly, heading to relatives in other territories or new lives in cities where nobody knew their history. Clara kept meticulous records in a locked ledger, names, dates, where they went, whether they were safe. Evidence, if it ever came to that. Proof that this mattered. "You're building an empire," Elizabeth told her during one of her regular visits. "Not the kind men usually build, but powerful all the same." "I'm just helping people." "Stop saying that like it's nothing. You're changing the entire structure of how this territory handles domestic violence. The legislature is drafting new protections. Sheriffs are actually arresting men for beating their wives instead of calling it a family matter." "You did that, Clara." Clara looked at the ledger, at all those names. Women who'd been brave enough to leave. "We did that. You argued the cases. Margaret housed them. Rowan backed it financially. And you survived Earl Whitmore and refused to stay quiet about it. Don't minimize what that took. That was the thing about surviving public trauma. You became a reference point whether you wanted to be or not." Clara couldn't walk through Blackstone Valley without women approaching her, sometimes to thank her, sometimes to ask for help, sometimes just to touch her arm like she was proof that escape was possible. It was exhausting. It was necessary. She was learning to live with both truths simultaneously. The ranch itself thrived in ways that surprised everyone, especially the merchants who'd tried to boycott them. Rowan's business instincts, combined with Clara's sharp eye, for patterns and inefficiency turned Iron Ridge into one of the most profitable operations in Montana Territory. They expanded their herd, bought adjacent land when it came available, hired more hands, and built a reputation for fair wages and decent treatment. "You know what's funny?" Rowan said one evening as they reviewed the books. "We're making more money now than before I fired Earl. Treating people well turns out to be good business. Revolutionary concept. Should write a book about it." Clara laughed. They did that more now, laughed together over small things, the kind of casual intimacy she'd never experienced in her first marriage. Rowan was easy to live with in ways that still surprised her. He didn't rage when dinner was late, didn't punish her for disagreeing, didn't need her to be small so he could feel big. Sometimes she still waited for the other boot to drop, for him to reveal the monster underneath the kindness. But 2 years in, 3 years in, 4 years in, no monster appeared. Just a man who kept his promises and loved her on purpose. The hard part was believing she deserved it. "I had another nightmare last night," she admitted one morning over coffee. Rowan didn't look surprised. The nightmares came less frequently now, but they still came. "Earl again?" "Yeah, same one. He's in the kitchen and I can't move and he just keeps coming." She stopped, throat tight. "You're safe. He's dead. He's been dead for years." "I know that in my head. My body doesn't always believe it. That's normal. Trauma lives in your bones. Margaret says it takes decades to fully heal, if it ever does." Clara appreciated that he didn't try to fix it, didn't tell her she should be over it by now, just acknowledged the reality and sat with her in it. "Sometimes I feel like I'm broken in ways that don't show, like I'm pretending to be a whole person, and eventually everyone will figure out I'm just fragments held together with stubbornness." Rowan was quiet for a moment, considering. "We're all fragments. Some people just hide it better. You survived something that should have killed you, body and spirit, and you're still here, still helping people, still building a life. That's not broken. That's resilience. Or too stubborn to quit. Same thing sometimes." Margaret appeared with breakfast, pointedly not commenting on Clara's red eyes. That was Margaret's gift, knowing when to mother and when to give space. "Your father's coming today," she reminded Clara. "Said he has news." William Hartley had been showing up for Sunday dinners for 3 years now, slowly earning his way back into Clara's life through consistent sobriety and genuine effort. They weren't close, might never be, but they'd achieved something like cautious affection. He arrived at noon looking nervous and pleased in equal measure. "I bought a house," he announced over pot roast. "Small place in town. Been saving my wages from the mill. Wanted you to see it before I move in." Clara set down her fork, surprised. "You're leaving the boarding house?" Seemed like time. Been there 4 years. A man should have his own place. He hesitated. "Thought maybe you'd help me fix it up. If you're not too busy, only if you want to." It was the most William had asked of her since reappearing in her life. He'd been so careful to not presume, to not push, to earn back her trust in increments. "I'd like that," Clara said, and meant it. His smile was pure relief. "Thank you, Clara girl." The old nickname hit her sideways. Something from before her mother died, before he gave her to Earl, before everything broke. She felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Bring me by tomorrow. I'll see what needs doing." They spent the next 3 weeks renovating William's house, Clara directing while William and some ranch hands did the heavy work. It was smaller than she expected, but solid, with good bones and big windows. She helped him pick paint colors, organized his sparse furniture, taught him how to care for the small garden plot out back. Working alongside her father, Clara realized something unexpected. She'd forgiven him. Not forgotten. The past still happened, still hurt, but she'd released the anger that had been eating her alive. He'd failed her terribly, but he was trying now, and that counted for something. "You didn't have to do all this," William said the day he moved in. "I know. But you did anyway. You're a better person than I deserved." Clara thought about that, about deserving and choice and how people were complicated. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just deciding what kind of person I want to be, and that person helps her father even when he wasn't always there for her. William's eyes went wet. "Your mama would be proud of who you became." I wish she could have seen it. "Me too, Clara girl. Me too." The ranch continued growing, and with it came new challenges. Neighboring spreads didn't love that Iron Ridge had become a haven for runaway wives. Bad for their business when their own workers' women started getting ideas about leaving. The Bartlett Ranch in particular became hostile. Jim Bartlett was old-school frontier, believed women were property, and men had God-given rights to discipline them. When his daughter-in-law showed up at Iron Ridge with a black eye and 2 terrified children, things got ugly fast. Bartlett showed up with 6 armed men demanding Clara return his son's family. Rowan met them at the property line with 12 armed ranch hands. "She's not here," Rowan said calmly, which was technically true. Clara had already moved the woman and children to a safe house in Helena. "You're harboring my son's wife. That's theft. People aren't property, can't steal what was never owned. The law says the law changed. Women can leave abusive marriages now. We helped pass those reforms, remember?" Bartlett's face went purple. "You're destroying everything decent people built in this valley. If decency requires women to get beaten, then it deserves destroying." It nearly came to shooting, 12 guns against 6. But Bartlett wasn't that stupid or that committed to his son's marriage. He left cursing Rowan's name and promising retribution. "That's going to cause problems," Margaret observed from the porch. "Good," Claire said. "Let it cause problems. We're not stopping." And they didn't. The network expanded across territories. Elizabeth Chambers opened a practice specifically for domestic violence cases. Safe houses appeared in 4 cities. The territorial legislature passed stronger protections. Women who would have died in silence found voices and lawyers and ways out. It wasn't perfect. Some women went back to their abusers. Some died before they could escape. Some found freedom and struggled to build lives after years of trauma. But some thrived, and those success stories kept Clara going when the failures threatened to drown her. 5 years into their marriage, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news hit her like physical force. She sat in Doc Morrison's office, unable to process the words. "You're sure?" "Very sure. About 3 months along, from what I can tell." 3 months. She'd been pregnant for 3 months and hadn't noticed because her cycles had always been irregular, and she'd been too busy managing the ranch and helping women and living her life to pay attention. A baby growing inside her, half Rowan. Terror crashed over her in waves. "I need to think," she told the doctor. Take your time. Come see me next week and we'll talk about what to expect." Clara walked out of that office in a daze, found herself at the creek behind the ranch house, the place she went when the world got too loud, sat on a flat rock and tried to remember how to breathe. She was going to be a mother. After everything Earl had done to her, the beatings, the broken bones, the terror, her body still worked well enough to create life. It felt like a miracle and a curse in equal measure. Rowan found her an hour later. "Doc Morrison said I'd find you here, said you might need company." "He told you?" "Yeah." Rowan sat beside her, not touching, giving her space to process. "How do you feel?" "Terrified." "That's honest." "What if I'm a terrible mother? What if I don't know how to love a child without fear? What if I repeat the patterns?" "Clara, stop." Rowan took her hand gently. "You spent years helping women escape violence. You rebuilt your entire life from nothing. You became one of the strongest people I know. You think that woman's going to hurt a child?" Earl's parents were kind. He still became a monster. Earl chose to be a monster. You're choosing to be better. That's the difference. Clara wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe she could be a mother without passing on trauma like inherited disease. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too. I'm terrified I'll mess this up. That I'll fail as a father, that something will go wrong like it did with Sarah, and I'll lose both of you." His voice cracked. "But I'm also excited. We're going to have a child, Clara. Our child. A person who'll grow up knowing love instead of violence. That's worth being scared for." She leaned against him, letting his steadiness ground her. Okay, we're having a baby, and we're going to figure it out together, and probably mess up sometimes, and hopefully do enough things right that the kid turns out mostly decent." Rowan laughed, the sound relieved and bright. "That's the spirit." The pregnancy was harder than Clara expected. Morning sickness lasted all day for the first 4 months. Her body ached in new ways. The nightmares got worse. Dreams where Earl came back and took her baby, where she gave birth to a child who looked at her with Earl's cruel eyes, where she failed in every possible way. But she kept going. Ran the ranch until she physically couldn't anymore. Helped women until Doc Morrison threatened to chain her to bed if she didn't slow down. Let Margaret and Rowan fuss over her even when it felt smothering, and slowly, as her belly grew and the baby started moving inside her, Clara felt something shift. This child was hers, not Earl's. He was dead and gone. Couldn't touch this. Not defined by trauma or survival, just new life, possibility, everything she'd fought for given physical form. She started talking to her stomach when she was alone, telling the baby about the ranch, about the mountains, about all the people who were waiting to meet them, promising things she hoped she could keep. "I'm going to love you," she whispered one night, hands on her swollen belly. "I'm going to protect you. And I'm never, ever going to make you feel small or scared or worthless. You're going to grow up knowing you matter, that you deserve respect, that love shouldn't hurt." The baby kicked in response and Clara laughed through tears. Labor came on a warm June evening, sudden and intense. Rowan panicked beautifully, running in circles until Margaret slapped him and told him to be useful. Doc Morrison arrived with his calm competence. The midwife from town appeared with supplies and steady hands. And Clara did the hardest physical work of her life, bringing a person into the world through blood and pain and determination. "One more push," the midwife encouraged. "Come on, Clara, one more." Clara pushed with everything she had, screaming through the pain, and suddenly there was a baby, small and red and wailing indignantly at being forced from warm darkness into cold light. "It's a girl," Doc Morrison announced, grinning, "healthy and loud." A daughter. Clara had a daughter. They cleaned the baby and wrapped her in soft blankets and placed her in Clara's arms, and the world narrowed to this tiny, perfect person looking up at her with unfocused eyes. "Hi," Clara whispered. "I'm your mama. I've been waiting for you." The baby made a small sound, hand curling around Clara's finger with surprising strength. Rowan appeared beside the bed, his face wet with tears. "She's beautiful. She's perfect. What should we name her?" Clara had thought about this for months, cycling through names that felt right. But looking at her daughter now, only one name fit. "Grace," she said. "Grace Cade. Because we needed Grace to survive. And she's living proof we did." Grace Cade grew up surrounded by love that was fierce and messy and real. She learned to walk chasing chickens across the ranch yard, learned to talk, listening to cowboys tell tall tales. Learned early that her mother was someone special. Women came from all over asking for help, and Mama always helped, even when she was tired. Clara watched her daughter grow with wonder and terror in equal measure. Every milestone felt like a miracle. Every skinned knee or childhood fever sent her spiraling into protective panic. Learning to parent without fear was harder than escaping Earl had been. "You're hovering," Rowan told her when Grace was 3 and climbing everything in sight. "She could fall." "She's going to fall. That's how kids learn." "I can't watch her get hurt." "You can't stop her from living either." It was a constant negotiation, letting Grace have freedom while keeping her safe. Clara knew she overcompensated, knew her own trauma made her more protective than necessary. But she was trying, and that had to count for something. Grace was 5 when she asked the question Clara had been dreading. "Mama, why do sad ladies come to our house?" They were in the garden, planting vegetables. Clara's hands stilled in the dirt. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "The ladies who cry, who have bruises. They come and stay in the spare room, and then they leave, and different ladies come." Clara sat back, wiping dirt on her apron, trying to find words a 5-year-old could understand. "Sometimes people get hurt by people who are supposed to love them. The sad ladies come here to be safe while they figure out what to do next." "Who hurt them?" "Usually their husbands." Grace's face scrunched up in confusion. "But Papa doesn't hurt you." "No, he doesn't. Papa's a good man. But not all men are good. Some are mean and scary." "Were you a sad lady once?" The question hit Clara sideways. She'd known this conversation was coming, but hadn't prepared for how much it would hurt. "Yes," she said carefully. "Before I married your papa, I was married to a mean man who hurt me a lot. I was very sad and very scared." "What happened to him?" "He went away. And I came here and met Papa, and eventually we fell in love and got married and had you. And now I help other sad ladies because I remember what it feels like to be scared and need help." Grace processed this with the seriousness children bring to important things. I'm glad you're not sad anymore. Me too, baby. Me too. That night, Clara told Rowan about the conversation. She's going to have questions as she gets older, he said. About Earl, about your past. What are we going to tell her? The truth. Age-appropriate versions, but the truth. I don't want her growing up thinking violence is normal or that women should stay quiet when they're hurt. She's lucky to have you as a mother. Clara wasn't sure about that. She still made mistakes, still lost her temper sometimes, still had moments where the past overwhelmed the present. But she was trying, every single day, to be better than what Earl had told her she was. And maybe that was enough. The years accumulated into something like normalcy. Grace grew into a smart, fierce child who argued with cowboys and helped her mother organize supply deliveries and learned ranch management the way other children learned their letters. Iron Ridge continued thriving. The network of safe houses expanded across 5 territories. Clara and Elizabeth won legal battles that kept pushing the frontier toward justice. William Hartley died when Grace was 7, peacefully in his sleep, the kind of death everyone hoped for. Clara cried at his funeral, mourning both the father he'd been and the father he'd tried to become. They'd never fully healed everything broken between them, but they'd built something new in the ruins, and that counted. Margaret died 2 years later, sudden heart attack while making bread. The loss devastated everyone. She'd been the heart of Iron Ridge, the steady presence that held everything together. Clara grieved like she'd lost her mother, because in all the ways that mattered, she had. But life continued because it had to. New people joined the ranch, old hands retired, the work went on. Clara was 38 when Congress passed the first federal domestic violence protections, citing Montana territorial law, the law her case had helped establish, as precedent. Elizabeth sent her a telegram with one word: victory. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of a very long fight, because laws didn't change hearts, and there would always be men who believed they owned their wives. Still, it was progress, hard-won and significant. Clara stood on the ranch porch that evening, reading the telegram again, thinking about all the women who'd passed through Iron Ridge, the ones who'd survived, the ones who hadn't, the children who'd grown up watching their mothers find courage. You changed the world, Rowan said, appearing beside her. We changed one small piece of it. There's still so much broken. So we keep fixing it. Grace ran past chasing the ranch dog, laughing and carefree in ways Clara had never been at that age. That alone felt like winning. The hardest conversation came when Grace was 12, and old enough to understand more complicated truths. They were riding fence line together, checking for damage after a storm, when Grace asked casually, Was Earl really that bad? Clara's hands tightened on the reins. They'd told Grace the basics, that Clara had been married before, that it ended badly, but not the details. He was worse than I've told you. Why do you ask? Some kids at school said their parents said you're a home wrecker, that you destroyed a good man's life because you wanted Papa's money. Rage flashed hot in Clara's chest. 13 years gone and people still blamed her for Earl's violence. Do you believe that? Grace looked at her with clear, assessing eyes. No. I see how you are with the women who come to us. I see your nightmares. I see how you flinch sometimes when Papa moves too fast, even though he'd never hurt you. I'm not stupid, Mama. Clara had spent 12 years trying to protect her daughter from the worst truths, but Grace deserved honesty. Earl hit me, regularly, for 13 years, broke my ribs, blackened my eyes, threatened to kill me. I stayed because I was scared and thought I had nowhere to go. Then I met your father, and he helped me leave. We fell in love later, after I was free. Everything else is lies people tell because they'd rather blame me than admit they ignored a woman being beaten to death. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Did you kill him? No, he died in prison, killed by another inmate. Were you glad? Clara met her daughter's eyes. Yes. I was glad he was dead and I didn't have to be afraid anymore. Does that make me a bad person? No, Grace said firmly. It makes you smart. They rode in silence after that, mother and daughter, connected by honesty and blood. I want to help, Grace said eventually, with the women. I want to learn how to do what you do. Clara felt pride and fear collide. You're 12? Old enough to start learning. You were younger than me when you married Earl. That truth hit hard. Clara had been 18, barely more than a child, handed to a violent man like livestock. "All right," she said slowly. "You can help. But we do this carefully. Some of these situations are dangerous." "I know. I've been watching my whole life, Mama. I'm not scared." "Maybe you should be." "Maybe. But you weren't scared either. You were terrified and you did it anyway." Clara looked at her daughter, fierce and brave and everything Clara had fought to protect, and felt something inside her settle. This was why. All of it. The testimony. The legal battles. The network. The help given in darkness and silence. So girls like Grace could grow up knowing they had choices. Knowing they didn't have to accept violence. Knowing their mothers would fight for them. "Okay," Clara said. "We'll start slow. You can help me organize supplies for the safe houses. Learn how to talk to women who are scared." "And Grace?" "Yeah? Thank you for being willing to see the hard parts of the world and wanting to make them better. I learned it from you." The years continued their steady march. Grace grew into a formidable young woman, managing parts of the network by 16, arguing down sheriffs and judges by 18. She went to college in Boston, the first woman in either family to do so, studying law with plans to join Elizabeth's practice. Clara watched her daughter leave for the East Coast with pride and terror. Her baby, going into the world without protection. "She'll be fine," Rowan assured her. "She's got your strength and your stubbornness. Nothing's going to stop her." "What if something happens?" "Then she'll handle it, because we raised her to handle things." Iron Ridge continued as it always had, cattle and cowboys and women passing through in the night. Clara was 50 now, her hair going gray, her hands rougher from years of work. She'd helped over 200 women escape violence, seen laws change across territories, watched the frontier become slightly less brutal for women. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. She was 53 when the stroke hit. One moment she was working in the garden, the next she was on the ground with Rowan shouting for help and the world tilting sideways. The recovery was brutal. Left side weak, speech slurred, mind sharp but body failing. Doc Morrison was honest. "You might not recover full function. You're lucky to be alive." Lucky. Clara lay in bed, unable to walk right or talk right, and thought about luck. She'd survived Earl, survived building a new life, survived childbirth and grief, and becoming a symbol for women she'd never meet. This felt like the universe saying enough. "I'm not giving up," she told Rowan, words thick and clumsy. "I know you're not. Ranch needs running. Grace is coming home. She'll help until you're back on your feet." "What if I don't get back?" "Then we adjust. Like we always do." The recovery took 2 years. Slow, painful work, relearning to walk without limping, to speak without slurring, to use her left hand for more than decoration. Grace came home from Boston and took over daily ranch operations with terrifying competence. Rowan never left Clara's side except when work demanded it, and slowly, stubbornly, Clara clawed her way back. Not perfect. Never perfect. She'd always walk with a slight limp, always struggle with certain words, but functional, present, alive. "You're the most stubborn person I've ever met," Doc Morrison told her the day he cleared her for full activity. "Kept me alive this long." That it has. Clara was 55 when she stood on the ranch porch and realized something profound. She'd lived more years free than she'd lived in captivity. 13 years with Earl, 21 years after. The math meant something. Rowan found her there, watching sunset paint the mountains gold. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we've come. How much has changed. How many women are alive because we refuse to quit." "You refused to quit. I just helped." "We did it together. All of it." He slipped an arm around her waist, easy affection after decades together. "Any regrets?" Clara thought about that. About the life she might have had if she'd never married Earl, if she'd been born in a different time, a different place, if violence hadn't shaped her into someone who spent her life helping others escape it. "No," she said finally. "I wish it had been easier. Wish I hadn't lost so many years to fear, but those years made me who I am. And I like who I became. I love who you became." They stood there as stars emerged, two people who'd survived separate hells and built heaven together, watching the ranch settle into evening. Grace appeared with news. Another woman needed help. Family emergency. Could they take her tonight? Always, Clara said, because that was the answer. Always had been. Always would be. That night, Clara helped a terrified 20-year-old with a black eye and a baby find safety. Listened to her story, gave her options, connected her with lawyers and safe houses and everything Clara wished she'd had at that age. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." "You're safe now. We'll figure out the rest." After the woman was settled, Clara stood in the kitchen of Iron Ridge Ranch, the same kitchen where she'd hidden bruises and made herself small and survived one day at a time, and felt the weight of it all. Every woman helped, every law changed, every child who grew up watching their mother find courage. It wasn't enough, would never be enough. Violence would persist because broken people existed and power corrupted and the world was hard. But she'd made her corner of it softer. That counted. Rowan appeared in his doorway. "Come to bed. You need rest." In a minute, she stayed there in the quiet, remembering the terrified woman she'd been. The one who'd thought survival was the same as living. Who'd believed she deserved violence. Who'd made herself so small she nearly disappeared. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who'd survived hell and decided to make sure others didn't have to. Clara Cade, ranch manager, mother, symbol of survival, proof that escape was possible and second chances were real. She'd rescued herself. Love had given her strength to finish the fight, and now she spent her days making sure other women knew they could rescue themselves too. That was enough. That was everything. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed beside her husband, in the house she'd helped build, on the ranch that had become sanctuary. Outside, storms gathered over the mountains like they always did. Rain would come. The world would continue its turning. Women would keep needing help, and Clara would keep giving it, because some fights never ended. You just chose whether to keep fighting or give up. And Clara had never been good at giving up. She'd survived. She'd thrived. She'd changed laws and saved lives and raised a daughter who would continue the work. No one had rescued her. She'd rescued herself. And that made all the difference.